The cafe door chimed softly as another customer stepped out into the snowy night. Inside, only a few tables were still occupied. Warm yellow lights glowed against frosted windows, and outside the snow fell slowly, covering the quiet town in white. Christmas Eve was almost over. At a small table near the window, Daniel Carter, a humble carpenter with rough hands and a tired coat, checked the time again. 8:47 p.m. He had been sitting there for nearly an hour. The blind date was supposed to start at 8. The waitress approached with a gentle smile. "Would you like anything else, sir?" Daniel glanced at the empty chair across from him. For a moment, it looked painfully lonely. He forced a small smile. "Maybe, just another cup of coffee." "Still waiting for someone?" she asked kindly. "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "A blind date." The waitress gave a sympathetic nod. She had seen this situation before. Many people simply didn't show up. But Daniel didn't seem angry or impatient. Just calm. Patient. As she walked away, two young couples at another table whispered quietly. "Poor guy," one of them said. "Looks like he got stood up on Christmas Eve." Daniel heard them. Of course he did. But he didn't react. Instead, he stared out the window at the falling snow. Truth was, this wasn't even his idea. A friend from church had insisted on arranging the blind date. "Daniel, you can't spend every Christmas alone in your workshop," his friend had said. "Just meet her once. She's a good person." Daniel hadn't argued. Not because he believed it would work. But because he had gotten used to saying yes when people tried to help. The door chimed again as another group left the cafe. Now only 3 tables remained occupied. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. 9:15 p.m. Another 30 minutes passed. The waitress returned with the coffee and hesitated. "You know," she said gently, "sometimes people get busy on Christmas Eve. Maybe something came up." Daniel nodded slowly. Maybe. But he still didn't stand up. He took a sip of coffee and quietly continued waiting. Outside, the snow grew heavier. Across town, lights flickered warmly in homes filled with families, laughter, and Christmas dinners. But Daniel sat alone in the cafe. Not angry. Not complaining. Just waiting. Because something in his heart told him. Tonight wasn't over yet. And somewhere, in the cold winter night, someone was rushing through the snow, afraid that she might already be too late. Snowflake hash. Across town, the snow fell harder with every passing minute. The streets were nearly empty now. Christmas lights flickered in warm windows, and laughter echoed faintly from homes where families gathered around dinner tables. But on the darker edge of the town, a lone figure hurried through the snow. Her name was Elena. Her coat was thin and worn, barely protecting her from the cold wind. Snow clung to her boots as she struggled forward, clutching a small bundle close to her chest. Inside the bundle was her child. A tiny dragon hatchling wrapped in an old blanket. The little creature peeked out with sleepy golden eyes, letting out a soft, tired chirp. Elena gently stroked the small dragon's head. "Just a little farther, Leo," she whispered softly. "We're almost there." But even as she said it, doubt filled her heart. Her breath came out in white clouds as she hurried down the icy street. "I'm too late." She already knew it. The blind date had been set for 8. She glanced up at the clock tower in the distance. 9:20 p.m. More than an hour late. Elena slowed down, her steps becoming hesitant. Snowflakes settled on her dark hair as she stood under a flickering street lamp. Maybe she should just turn around. Maybe the man had already left. And honestly, who would blame him? After all, what kind of woman showed up this late to a blind date? A poor single mother. With a dragon child. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Her life hadn't always been like this. Once, she had lived peacefully in a small dragon village beyond the mountains. But after the war scattered her people, everything had changed. Her mate had disappeared, her home was gone, and survival became the only thing that mattered. Food was scarce. Work was even harder to find. And raising a dragon hatchling alone in a human town. That was something most people simply didn't understand. Leo let out a small whimper from the blanket. Elena looked down and forced a gentle smile. "It's okay," she murmured. "Mama's here." But inside, her heart felt heavy. The truth was, she almost hadn't come tonight. When the matchmaker suggested the blind date, Elena had laughed bitterly. "Who would want someone like me?" she had said. But the old woman had insisted. "He's a good man," the matchmaker promised. "Kind. Patient. A carpenter. He works with his hands and understands hard lives." Elena hadn't believed it. Still, something small inside her heart had whispered, "What if?" Now she stood in the middle of the snowy street, staring toward the warm lights of the town cafe in the distance. Her feet felt frozen. Her courage almost gone. What if he had already left? What if he saw her, and changed his mind the moment he noticed the dragon child? Elena hugged Leo closer. For a moment, she turned slightly, ready to walk back into the cold night and forget this foolish hope. But just then, the little dragon hatchling lifted his head. Leo looked up at her with bright golden eyes and made a soft chirping sound. Almost as if he was encouraging her. Elena stared at him. Then slowly, she took a deep breath. "All right," she whispered. "One last try." With renewed determination, she tightened the blanket around Leo and began walking again, faster this time, toward the warm glow of the cafe lights. She didn't know if the man would still be there. But somewhere inside that cafe, a patient carpenter was still sitting at a small table by the window. And he hadn't left yet. Snowflake hash. Inside the cafe, the warmth of the heaters hummed quietly against the winter cold outside. Only a few people remained now. The couples who had been whispering earlier had already left, and the chairs around most tables were empty. Christmas music played softly from an old speaker near the counter. At the table by the window, Daniel Carter sat exactly where he had been all evening. His second cup of coffee had long gone cold. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. 9:43 p.m. The waitress approached again, this time with a more careful expression. "Sir, we'll probably be closing soon," she said gently. "I can pack something for you if you'd like." Daniel looked up at her and gave a calm smile. "That's all right," he said. "I'll finish this and head out soon." She hesitated. "You've been very patient," she added kindly. "Most people would have left hours ago." Daniel chuckled quietly. Well, maybe she had a reason. The waitress didn't say anything more, but she gave him a sympathetic nod before walking back to the counter. Outside the window, the snowfall had grown thicker. The streetlights cast golden circles across the empty sidewalks. Daniel glanced at the empty chair across from him again. Part of him knew it was time to go. The blind date clearly wasn't happening. Still, he found himself waiting just a little longer. Just in case. The cafe grew quieter as one of the workers began wiping down nearby tables. The door remained closed. The clock turned to 9:58 p.m. 2 minutes before 10. Daniel slowly stood up and reached for his coat. "All right," he murmured softly to himself. "Guess that's that." Just as he picked up his scarf, the cafe door suddenly chimed. Everyone in the room instinctively looked toward the entrance. A blast of cold winter air rushed inside. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She looked exhausted. Snow covered her shoulders and hair, and her breathing was slightly uneven as if she had been running through the storm. Her coat looked thin, almost too light for the freezing weather. And in her arms, she carried a small bundle wrapped tightly in a blanket. For a moment, no one moved. The workers stared. The waitress blinked in surprise. Then the woman stepped inside slowly, brushing snow from her sleeves. Her voice was nervous. "Excuse me," she said softly. Her eyes scanned the cafe until they landed on the man standing near the window. "Are you Daniel?" Daniel froze for half a second. Then he nodded. "Yes, I am." The woman looked both relieved and embarrassed at the same time. "I'm Elena," she said quickly. I'm so sorry I'm late." She glanced toward the clock on the wall. Her face turned even more red with shame. "I know it's very late, and you probably waited a long time." At that moment, the small bundle in her arms moved. The blanket shifted. And a tiny dragon hatchling poked its head out, blinking its golden eyes at the room. The waitress gasped softly. One of the workers nearly dropped the dishes he was holding. But Daniel didn't react the way everyone expected. He didn't stare. He didn't step back. Instead, his expression softened. He walked over to the table and gently pulled the empty chair out. Then he looked at Elena and smiled warmly. "You must be freezing," he said calmly. "Please, sit down." For the first time that night, the empty chair across from Daniel was no longer empty. Snowflake hash. For a moment, Elena simply stood there, unsure what to do. She had expected many things when she finally arrived. Awkward silence. Disappointment. Maybe even rejection. But not this. Not a warm smile and a chair waiting for her. The tiny dragon hatchling in her arms blinked curiously at Daniel as Elena slowly stepped toward the table. I'm really sorry," she said again as she carefully sat down. The snow got worse, and Leo wouldn't stop crying. "I almost turned back a few times." Daniel shook his head gently. It's all right, he said. You made it. His voice was calm and steady, the kind that made people feel at ease without trying. Elena carefully loosened the blanket so the little dragon could breathe comfortably. The hatchling peeked out again, looking around the cafe with curious golden eyes. Daniel leaned forward slightly, studying the tiny creature. So this is Leo, he said softly. Elena nodded, a little nervous. Yes, my son. She waited for the reaction she had grown used to. Shock. Fear. Or polite discomfort. Instead, Daniel simply smiled. He's small, he said. But he looks strong. Leo chirped softly, almost as if responding to the compliment. The waitress approached carefully, clearly trying not to stare too much. Would you like something warm to eat? She asked Elena. Elena hesitated. Truthfully, she hadn't eaten much that day. But she felt embarrassed ordering food when she had already arrived so late. Before she could answer, Daniel spoke gently. 2 hot soups and some bread, please. The waitress nodded and hurried off. Elena looked at him in surprise. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. It's Christmas Eve, Daniel replied with a small shrug. No one should go hungry tonight. For a moment, Elena didn't know what to say. The warmth of the cafe, the smell of food, and the soft Christmas music made the moment feel strangely peaceful. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. After a short silence, Daniel spoke again. So, the matchmaker told me a little about you, he said carefully. But not much. Elena looked down at her hands. There were small scars on her fingers from years of hard work. My story isn't very cheerful, she admitted. That's all right, Daniel said. Neither is mine. That made her glance up in surprise. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. I've been a carpenter in this town for about 10 years, he explained. Before that, I traveled around doing construction work wherever I could find it. Do you have family here? Elena asked softly. Daniel shook his head. Not anymore. The answer was simple, but the quiet weight behind it said enough. For the first time, Elena realized something. This man sitting across from her. He understood loneliness. The waitress soon returned with 2 steaming bowls of soup and a basket of fresh bread. The smell alone made Leo wiggle excitedly inside the blanket. Daniel chuckled softly. I think Leo approves. Elena couldn't help but smile a little. It was the first real smile she had shown all night. As they ate, the conversation slowly became easier. Elena eventually shared more about her life. About the dragon village she once called home. About the war that forced many of her kind to scatter. About losing her mate and raising Leo alone in a human town where dragons were rare and often misunderstood. Daniel listened quietly the entire time. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. When she finished, Elena looked down again, embarrassed. Sorry, she said softly. That's a lot for a first meeting. Daniel wiped his hands with a napkin and shook his head. No, he said. It's honest. He looked at Leo, who had now curled up comfortably in the blanket. Besides, Daniel added with a gentle smile, anyone raising a dragon alone must be stronger than they think. Elena felt something strange in her chest. Not pity. Not sympathy. But respect. And for the first time in years, she felt like someone was truly seeing her. Outside, the snow finally began to slow. Inside the small cafe, the clock quietly ticked closer to midnight. And what started as a blind date was slowly becoming something much more meaningful. Christmas tree. The cafe had grown almost completely silent. Most of the lights were dimmed now, and the workers had finished cleaning the empty tables. Only the soft glow above Daniel and Elena's table remained on. Outside the window, the snow had finally begun to slow, drifting gently under the streetlights. The clock on the wall ticked closer to midnight. 11:52 p.m. Leo was now fast asleep inside the blanket, curled into a tiny warm ball against Elena's chest. For a while, neither Elena nor Daniel spoke. But the silence between them was no longer awkward. It was calm. Comfortable. Elena slowly looked around the nearly empty cafe. I didn't expect you to still be here, she admitted quietly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why not? She hesitated before answering. Most people wouldn't wait that long, especially for someone like me. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. Someone like you? He asked. Elena gave a small, self-conscious laugh. A poor single mother who shows up 2 hours late, with a dragon child. Daniel studied her for a moment. Then he shook his head. I see someone who crossed a snowstorm just to keep a promise. His answer caught her off guard. She hadn't expected kindness to sound so simple. Elena looked down at Leo, gently adjusting the blanket around him. Life hasn't been easy, she said softly. Sometimes I feel like I'm just surviving day by day. Daniel nodded slowly. I know the feeling. He glanced at his rough hands resting on the table. 4 years, my life was just work in an empty house, he said. Wake up. Build furniture. Fix doors. Go home. Repeat. He smiled faintly. Christmas was always the quietest day. Elena felt a strange ache hearing that. Then why did you wait? She asked. Daniel thought for a moment before answering. Because if someone was brave enough to agree to meet a stranger on Christmas Eve, he said calmly, I figured they deserved at least one person who didn't leave. Elena's eyes softened. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. Outside, church bells began ringing faintly in the distance. Midnight. Christmas Day had arrived. The waitress approached one last time, smiling warmly. Merry Christmas, she said gently. Daniel and Elena both looked up in surprise. Then Daniel chuckled. Well, I guess we made it. Elena smiled too. Merry Christmas. The waitress left them with a small box. A little leftover cake, she explained. On the house. Daniel thanked her, and the two of them shared the small dessert while Leo continued sleeping peacefully. Outside, the clouds slowly began to clear. For the first time that night, the moon appeared between them. After a while, Daniel stood and picked up his coat. It's late, he said. Let me walk you home. Elena looked surprised. You don't have to. I know, he replied. But the streets are icy, and Leo looks comfortable. After a moment, she nodded. Together, they stepped outside into the quiet Christmas night. Fresh snow crunched softly under their boots. The town looked peaceful, glowing under the moonlight. For a while, they walked side by side without speaking. Then Daniel glanced at her. Would you like to meet again sometime? He asked. Elena looked down at the sleeping dragon in her arms. Then she looked at Daniel. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel impossible. I'd like that, she said softly. Above them, snowflakes drifted slowly through the cold night air. And somewhere in the quiet town, on a simple Christmas Eve blind date, 2 lonely lives had just begun a new chapter together. Christmas tree snowflake hash.